Hello, this is going to be a video about how I make videos. I want this to be helpful for those who want to start making vids themselves. It'll be most helpful if you want to do informative reviews, perhaps let's plays or some such, but hopefully some of what I say here will be helpful no matter what you want to make in at least some way. If you're just here out of interest or you enjoy my other videos and want to see what goes into one, I hope this will still be fun to watch. It isn't going to be incredibly deep, this is very much a beginner's guide, some basics to help you along, some parts of my workflow won't help others and some will. An important part of making something, videos, music, writing, is in figuring out what works for you and what doesn't. One of the best books on screenwriting that I ever picked up was Story by Robert McKee. At least before it goes off the deep end with rule upon rule piling up until you couldn't possibly write a single page of script without a mathematical formula, it gets the basics out of the way in a very enthusiastic and approachable manner. I've always found the best creative advice to be simple, straightforward, and open-ended. McKee wrote Story because he wanted people to make good films, or at least his idea of one. He wrote it for a selfish reason, and it's a great selfish reason. Honestly, I just want more people to be making the stuff they want to make. This video is currently a Patreon goal, but it will be made public with time, as I do want this to help as many people as it can. The best advice I can give you if you want to start making something is to just start. I make the kind of videos I want to see on YouTube. They could still be better in many ways, my sound mixing in particular needs a lot of work, but if you watch my earlier stuff, the style was different and the quality was worse. Make something even if you aren't entirely sure what it is you want to be making just yet. And I mean, even if you know exactly what it is you want to make right now, the first time you make something, it will not be entirely what you want, but go for it. And keep practicing and keep making stuff. At least then, when you realize what it is that you really want to be making that is your actual aim, you'll have the skills you've picked up getting to that point, you'll be more confident you can make the thing, and you may already have some people watching you. If you have any questions, then please ask in the comments for further elaboration. I'm not a technically minded person, so the parts of this review about the tech side will be lacking compared to someone a bit more specialised in that regard. So anyway, on to section 1. 1. Picking a game. This wasn't going to be a section, but a friend asked me how I picked the games I decide to cover, and unfortunately my answer for him wasn't all that great. I'm incredibly scattershot, I go through periods of being very interested in one subgenre, I get bored quite easily. Generally there isn't a hard and fast rule, I arbitrarily decide that I'm interested in covering a game, and I do it. There are a couple of considerations after that, however. Has a game been covered a lot already? If yes, do I feel that I'll find anything unique and interesting to say if I do cover it? I want a no to the first one and a yes to the second. I definitely want a yes to the second. There are a couple of more strict rules. I don't do early access games, which is annoying because I want to do RimWorld and it's very slowly getting there. Ideally, the game I review won't massively change down the line, and that's part of the early access problem. So, as to a game being covered a lot already, this is a bit of a tricky one for me, because I consider myself a little bit out of the cultural loop. It's a blessing and a curse. You get to feel original without any idea whether you actually are. You're a lot less influenced, but a bit blinded to things. It's kind of why when I get comments asking me to cover certain games, I am at the same time delighted and put off of doing that particular game. It's an arrogant and bizarre reaction, because I want to do what people want me to do, but I also want to do a game that no one saw coming. Perhaps I'm just a contrarian. For you, picking a subject matter is knowing where your interests lie. It's best to start with what you know very well, something you could talk about for a good while without a script. Start in familiar territory, and if you feel like it, branch out from there. 2. Recording a game. As for recording options, for PCs you have plentiful options for recording software nowadays. I'm not familiar with using capture cards for PC, so you'll have to look elsewhere, I'm afraid. If you have an Nvidia card, you may be able to use Shadowplay through GeForce. If you can, do. It is the best recording software I've used, great quality, decent compression to MP4, doesn't lag games near as much as anything else I've used, and due to the fact I have it on desktop mode, it can handle whatever I throw at it. I can and will shill for Shadowplay. I don't think they call it that anymore though. This may also be a free option to some of you. The other free option I've used is OBS, or Open Broadcaster software, which while intended for streaming, can record footage just fine. It can export it as either MP4 or Flash files if you want Flash files for whatever reason. OBS has a bit more of a system impact, but it's free, modifiable, and you can get it to record a good number of programs. If you want to throw down some money, I can also suggest DxStory. It's a highly configurable program, and one of the only ones I can note that records multiple audio tracks, unless I've overlooked something in the other programs. This is important for some, because it means that if you are doing live stuff, your game audio and microphone feed are kept apart, so you can turn things up and down as needed in post. or do some audio post-processing if needed without dragging the game audio along for the ride. In any case, if you don't want to use DxStory but still want these separate audio feeds, you can record the game and have an exterior program like Audacity and sync things up later. If you want to do a sync thing, just leave a point for yourself, like talking about exact button presses on menus to line things up later. Lastly, there is Fraps, but this is not the year 2007. If you want to be really retro, get Hypercam and go for it. There's someone out there who will feel nostalgic seeing that. Really, swap between programs depending on the game. Some have no luck with certain titles. I'm not a technically inclined guy, so my problem-solving method is generally to throw as many solutions as I can at a thing until one sticks. If you're recording console games, I'd recommend an Elgato Game Capture for modern stuff. Recording consoles means that you're going to have to put money down if you want to go this route. Recording older consoles can also be a bit of a pain, at least in my experience, particularly when it comes to deinterlacing footage. I'm no expert there, and I have the luxury of emulators. 3. Playing and notes. The most important part of reviewing a game, to most anyway I'd hope, is playing the thing. I always aim to hit a story's end if a game naturally falls that way. If it's a free roamer or open-ended, I go until I feel I've seen a reasonable chunk of gameplay, naturally having experienced as much of a game as possible along the way. I started reviewing games for a few reasons. I wanted to see more informative reviews on YouTube, I wanted to get more out of games and think more critically about what I play, I felt it would make good editing practice, and I'm the kind of person who needs to feel busy. And hey, if I'm making a video out of this game, I can spend time playing it. It also makes me more interested in completing things, because I get to share my thoughts afterwards. So I use it on games I want to beat but can't trick myself into making time for otherwise. I don't really play games I'm reviewing in the same way I casually play games, however. I play them a bit more experimentally if I can afford to. I can tell if I'm losing interest in a game as I stop trying things out and become more routine. I'm typically prodding at the game's edges, baiting the AI, trying out every weapon and seeing what works, and occasionally trying to find optimal ways to win to see if a game can be gamed. It's not always a bad thing if it can, but for some, an absolute perfect playstyle is dreadfully dull. I think a very important question should be at the back of all of this, however. What is the way the developers want this to be played? Funny enough, I'm sure most people will have different answers for the same game. Even then, that answer is useful since it gives you a framing device to throw your findings against. Even if you don't end up using what you get from it, it can be a valuable thought. I have a friend who wants to get into Let's Plays, and the way he plays games is rather slowly, always trying to watch the big dramatic moments, and playing the game as though it's an E3 gameplay demo. He sees games through a film lens. Is that the intended way? For some games, maybe. For most, maybe not. Likely for Uncharted, but even then, not for me. But he enjoys it that way, so it's correct for him. I could see him doing videos where he breaks down how photogenic a game is if you play it like a DOP. I'm also playing far slower, however, as I'm also taking notes. 4. Note-taking purposes. I fucking love notes. Notebooks are the best shit ever. These aren't all review notes, don't worry. Some are university notes, some are story ideas, some are from RPGs I've run. The point is, notebooks are what you need. Maybe some pens too. So yeah, I fill a lot of pages up with notes when playing through a game. An important thing to figure out is what you should be writing down. The answer, at least near the start of a game, is nearly everything. As you get further in and start seeing what's very important to the game or things that are not noteworthy, then you can start dropping the unimportant details. You don't have to write 13,671st parrot sold in Pet Shop Mogul 2017. More importantly is making notes that are easily found and memorable to you. My older notes were very contextual and only really made sense to me, which is fine, but it can make tracking them down later a mess. I have a bit of a fix for this in the next section. These notes have a handful of different purposes. I have a terrible memory, so this takes some of the strain off. I organise these notes by video in chronological order, so it's a log of events. I note events, even the same events happening over and over again, so you can gauge how often and how important a certain type of gameplay or story is. And like I said, if one event happens so often, you could stop noting it. You'll definitely be able to find footage of it. It gives you a scattershot log of the story, and it also lets you recall your thoughts in the moment of play. The gut reaction you can either put in the later script or refine with time into a more cogent thought. It lets you have a sort of written structure of the game at hand. During Gotcha Force, I had a logging system I used for battles for easy reference. It let me see at a glance how long things went before any new story came in. Obviously though, and you can see this, if my camera is good enough and I pulled focus well enough, you'll see that my handwriting is dog shit. 5. Digitizing notes and tagging. No problem, however, because now onto the worst part of making a review, digitizing the notes. Yeah, you get the notes in the moment and type it down all over again. Or if you're more patient, you can watch the video back and take notes watching your playback. Not just so that you can read things more easily and have easier access during editing, I also add tags to any notes in games that need them, typically the more free roam stuff. This lets me make bizarre notes that reflect my thoughts at the time but would be trickier to recall later on, and it lets me have a reasonable metric for finding them. Depending on the game, these notes may get more or less specific. I can add a motorcycle tag for anything pertaining to bikes. Phone or hacking as a tag in Watch Dogs for anything that relates to those particular gimmicks. Part of giving out my scripts, aside from being a pledge reward, is that it will gear my notes to be more useful as I'm now subconsciously trying to write them in a more easily understood manner, as though I'd be handing off my footage and notes to a different editor. This also lets you Control F and type in the relevant term to find footage that is relevant to whatever your commentary is. It lets you keep on top of what can be tens of hours of footage a lot easier, and perhaps longer if you decide to do RPGs. This is a very boring part of making videos, but it will save you so much time later down the line. Number 6. Review order and script. Once I've completed a game and compiled my notes, I put down a page of notable thoughts. I try to fill at least one page with general information and summarized notes. Things I definitely want to say, jokes I want to work in. I can come back and reference this page as needed if I ever feel a little lost in the next step. I can quickly scan it and it's like taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture. One writing tip I haven't had to use writing a review but has helped me in screenwriting is writing a simple sentence on a post-it note and putting it in front of your word processor. This sentence should be the central aim of your writing so that you've always got it in your vision and can mold your writing around it. Before going on to the next step, I also try to see how much of the plot and how many little moments and mechanics I can recall without referring back to notes. How memorable a game is important. How memorable a story is even more so. Even if they aren't the key focus, and sometimes gut feelings are very useful in a subjective video such as a review. Before I write a review script, I make an order. This is, for me, the hardest part of writing a review. It's essentially the skeleton, it's the structure that everything rests on. Some editors and writers have a corkboard with many little post-it notes on them, with story beats written down on these post-it notes. With that corkboard, they can move around the story and have a nice physical image of what moving an element does to everything else. The review order is a digital version of that for me, and a lot more wordy. I write down the subjects with chapter titles, and within them, I put down individual points in chunks. I like my reviews to go through the game somewhat chronologically if it's beneficial, and I like to dole out information in a way that later points are aided or built upon by earlier ones, so that over the course of a review, it's less like a bunch of disparate points, and more like something greater than the sum of its parts. This is also where I can figure out just how the game's structure influences the review. In Dying Light, I got the story out of the way early due to how generic and dull it felt. Hatred barely had a story, so it had to be similarly worked out early. Boiling Point felt like a journey, so I weaved gameplay through it in a way that I felt matched my expanding thoughts and experiences throughout the game. Gangland was so segmented yet repetitive, I could hand over new stages to talk about new gameplay elements. Well, older gameplay elements that had been there for a while, and you got to feel that repetition building on itself in a way. At least I hope so, that was the aim. You get the idea. I like structuring, and I let the game influence how I give out information. The most obvious route is not always the best one. I struggle a lot with some reviews shuffling these things around. What having this order also allows me to do is make separate points and sections flow into one another a bit more fluidly if I feel that's necessary and if I'm capable of doing so. The order is typically followed quite closely, the wording is made a bit more natural, and in the script itself I may need to shuffle further as I realise further improvements could be made and how, with a more conversational wording, certain parts don't work the way they do in a kind of chunked script. It's funny how even when I'm not feeling things in the review order, when I get around to writing the script itself, things tend to fall into place quite naturally. It's like having a safety net. Granted, redrafting does often lead to an improved product. 7. Recording audio. Recording narration takes me a while. I cut out a load of little flubs, and annoyingly none are funny enough for an outtake video, just rather annoying. I'll give out some basic tips to help with audio quality, but depending on what you're making, and if it requires narration and your voice, you'll want to muck around with audio editing a lot. Something that may be nice to know is that even Audacity is a decent suite, and it's free, and vocals can be enhanced quite well. I've only enhanced my voice in a couple of videos. I want to start doing it more, but I feel it'd be jarring at this point, a bit too little too late. As for microphones, I use a Blue Yeti, I'm not using it now. It's not the best choice for its price. I also own an AT2020 and a Sennheiser ME66 that I use for film, which is what I am using for this video. As far as mics go, one I could recommend is the Blue Snowball, which is decently cheap and has quite good quality. While I don't use this subreddit for various reasons, there is a half-decent list of microphones with audio links here. And of course, look into a Vox Guard and/or a pop filter. They help with pops and hissing and just generally make things sound nicer. They're not terribly expensive either. While I do use Adobe Audition, it's far more flexible and I'm far more familiar with it. Audacity has a couple of incredibly helpful features to make your audio more palatable. First off is noise removal. This is a lifesaver. If you have minor background noise and your voice overpowers it, First off is noise removal. This is a lifesaver. If you have minor background noise and your voice overpowers it, noise removal can take the rest of it away without any noticeable impact on the vocals. You gotta mess around with it a bit first to see how harsh it is, but once you get there, it will massively help how you sound. Here are two great videos on vocal editing by Mike Russell. These videos are made for Audition, but Audacity has several similar features, so look for the same name. It has a 20-band equalizer and a high-pass filter. It's still a flexible suite if lacking professional features. It will be enough to pick up the basics definitely and get you something more than decent. Like all things, what works for you will be up to discovery and playing with settings. 8. Editing tips. I have a rule in that at least 80% of the review, the video has to be backing up what I am saying at that moment. I'm trying to source the game at nearly all times. I'm going to have to admit, I don't know any good free video editors. I've always had access to at least Sony Vegas since I've started doing these videos, and it suffices for these kind of reviews. All you really need to get started is learning what button or key type splits a clip in two, and how to turn up and down volume levels, and you can learn that in 5 minutes. From there it's picking up the intricacies of a program and learning proper cut timing, and that's more an art than a science. I'd really recommend reading In the Blink of an Eye by Walter Murch if you're interested in good cutting. He breaks it down in simple but very practical terms. The more you learn about your editing program, the more free and flexible you are. Still, I now have hours upon hours of footage to skim through hundreds, if not thousands of times considering the number of cuts I tend to make to find appropriate and fitting background footage. So that digitized log of game notes is my saviour. I keep the script open as well in case I leave any cutaway gags or footage notes in there. I've also learned a valuable lesson that will likely be obvious, but learn what to look for in an edit window. If you're about to talk about a certain kind of weapon you don't use often, learn what parts of the hood to look for while you zoom through relevant footage. Watch the ammo count or watch the health bar. Use that in-game information to help you out now more than ever. One last thing, and it's a sour note to end on, I am afraid. I do enjoy making reviews at most stages, but making videos, particularly the longer or more complex they get, it becomes a very time-consuming venture. I compare making a review video to building a castle out of pebbles. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and several stages can get very dull. It's not bad to get bored at stages, particularly near the end of production, definitely while digitizing notes and occasionally during the production of the script, which I'd consider the most creative and free-form part. Writer's block is a thing, and in my case I struggle with structure to the point of indecision and stress, which, I'm just going to put it this way, stress isn't always a bad thing. Stress means that you care about something, but don't let it make you dislike what you make. Take breaks, rethink, and look at the bigger picture. Know that work is done when it's done, and if you're a creative sort, it's more than worth it to finish something that you're happy with, and sharing it so that you can entertain others. Thanks for listening. If you want to ask any questions or need any elaboration or further hints, please do ask below. I hope this video was interesting and to some helpful. I am genuinely interested in other people's creative processes and what skills they've picked up along the way that informs how they create things, and that's what led to the idea for this video. This was TheSnakerer, see ya.